The Romance of a Christmas Card by Kate Douglas Wiggin. Chapter 9. "That's a bargain, and here's my hand on it," cried Dick. "Now, what do you say to letting me be Santa Claus? Come on in, and let's take a look at John Trimble. He'd make a splendid Joe or Jeremiah, but I wouldn't let him spoil a Christmas festival. Do let Dick take the part, father." And Mrs. Todd's tone was most ingratiating. "John's terrible dull and bashful anyway, and maybe he'd have a pain he couldn't stand just when he's giving out the presents. And Dick is always so amusing." Deacon Todd led the way into the improvised dressing room. He had removed John's gala costume in order to apply the mustard faithfully, and he lay in a crumpled heap in the corner. The plaster itself had torn a stool nearby. "Now, John, that plaster won't do you any good on the stool. It ain't the stool that needs drawing, it's your stomach," argued Mrs. Todd. "I'm drawed pretty nigh to death already," moaned John. "I'm raw, and that's what I am, raw, and I won't be Santa Claus either. I want to go home." "Rope him up and get him into your sleigh, father, and take him home, then come right back. Bed's the place for him. Keep that hot flat iron on his stomach. We'd rather have it than the mustard. Men folks are such cowards. I'll dress Dick while you're gone. Maybe it's a providence." On the whole, Dick agreed with Mrs. Todd as he stood ready to make his entrance. The school committee was in the church, and he had had much to do with its members in the former days. The select men of the village were present, and he had made their acquaintance once in an executive session. The deacons were all there, and the pillars of the church, and the choir, and the organist, a spinster, who had actively disapproved when he had put beans in the melodeon one Sunday. Yes, it was best to meet them in a body on a festive occasion like this, when the rigours of the village point of view were relaxed. It would relieve him of several dozen private visits of apology, and altogether he felt that his courage would have wavered had he not been disguised as another person altogether, a popular favourite, a fat, jolly, rollicking dispenser of bounties to the general public. When he finally discarded his costume, would it not be easier, too, to meet his father first before the church full of people, and have the solemn hour with him alone later at night? Yes, as Mrs. Todd said, maybe it was Providence. There was never such a merry Christmas festival in the Orthodox Church of Beulah. Everybody was of one mind as to that. There was a momentary fear that John Trimble, a pillar of prohibition, might have imbibed hard cider. So gay, so nimble, and so mirth-provoking was Santa Claus. When was John Trimble ever known to unbend sufficiently to romp up the side aisle, jingling his sleigh bells, and leap over a front pew stuffed with presents, to gain the vantage ground he needed for the distribution of his pack? The winged pews on one side of the pulpit had been floored over, and the Christmas tree stood there, triumphant in beauty, while the gifts strewed the green-covered platform at its feet. How gay, how audacious, how witty was Santa Claus! How the village had always misjudged John Trimble, and how completely had John Trimble hitherto obscured his light under a bushel. In his own proper person, children avoided him, but they crowded about this Santa Claus, encircling his legs, gurgling with joy when they were lifted to his shoulder, the laughter ringing through the church at his droll antics. A sense of mystery grew when he opened a pack on the pulpit stairs, a pack unfamiliar in its outward aspect to the committee on entertainment. Every girl had a little doll dressed in fashionable attire, and every boy a brilliantly coloured, splendidly noisy tin trumpet. But hanging to every toy by a red ribbon was Mrs. Larrabee's Christmas card, a despised one, about the folks back home. The publisher's check to the minister's wife had been accompanied by a dozen complimentary copies, but these had been sent to Reba's Western friends and relations, and although the card was on many a marble-topped table in Beulah, it had not been bought by all the inhabitants by any means. 15 cents would purchase something useful. Beulah did not contain many christmasses. Still, here the cards were, enough of them for everybody, with a linen handkerchief for every woman and every man in the meeting-house, and a dozen more sticking out of the back, as the people in the front pews could plainly see. Modest gifts, but plenty of them. Nobody knew from whence they came. There was a buzzing in the church, a buzzing that grew louder and more persistent when Santa Claus threw a lace scarf round Mrs. Larrabee's shoulders and approached her husband with a fine beaver collar in his hands that trembled, as everybody could see, when he buttoned a piece of fur around the old minister's neck. And the minister? He had been half in and half out of a puzzling dream for past 10 minutes, and when those hands of Santa Claus touched him, his flesh quivered. They reminded him of baby fingers that had crept round his neck years ago, when he patiently walked the parsonage floor at night with his ailing child in his arms. Every drop of blood in his veins called for an answer. He looked above the white cotton beard and moustache to a pair of dark eyes, merry, mischievous, yet tender and soft, at a brown wavy lock escaping from the home-made wig. Then those who were near heard a weak voice say, "My son," and those who were far away observed Santa Claus tear off his wig and beard, heard him cry, "Father," and, as Mrs. Todd said afterwards, saw him fall on the minister's neck right there before the whole capital, and cling to him for all the world like an engaged couple, only they wouldn't have made so free in public. No eyes would have thawed in such an atmosphere. Grown-up Beulah had forgot how much trouble Dick Larrabee had caused in the other days, and the children had found a friend for all time. The extraordinary number of dolls, trumpets, handkerchiefs, and Christmas cards circulating in the meeting-house raised the temperature considerably, and induced a general feeling that if Dick Larrabee had really ever been a bit wild and reckless, he had evidently reformed and prospered besides. Yes, no one but a kind and omniscient Providence could have so beautifully arranged Dick Larrabee's homecoming, and so wisely superintended his complete reinstatement in the good graces of Beulah village. A few maiden ladies felt that he had been a trifle immodest in embracing and especially in kissing his father in front of the congregation, venturing the conviction that kissing, an indecorous custom in any event, was especially lamentable in public. "Pretty Letty Boynton missed this evening," said Mrs. Todd. "Her and Dick Allers had a fancy for each other, so I've heard, though I don't know how true. Clarissa Perry may just as well have stayed with the twins as not, for a niece that spoke a piece forgot about half of it, and Clarissa was in a cold sweat every minute. Then the niece had a fit of crying. She was so ashamed at failing, and Clarissa had to take her home. So they both missed the tree, and Letty might have been here as well as not, and got her handkerchief and her card. I said John Trimble's to him by the doctor, but he didn't take no notice. Isaac said, for the doctor was lifting off the hot flat iron and putting turpentine on the spot where I had put my mustard. Anyway, if John had to have the colic, he couldn't have chosen a better time, and if he gets over it, I shall be real glad he had it. For nobody ever seen such a Santa Claus as Dick Larrabee made. And there never was and never will be such a lively and amusing and free and easy evening in the Orthodox Church. End of chapter 9. If you like the series, The Romance of a Christmas Card, please show us your love and support by liking and subscribing below.